Good morning, everyone. This is Jennifer Clark. I'm the Operations Coordinator with the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I want to welcome you today to today's webinar, Athletes as Leaders, a Prevention Program for Girls in Sports Teams. Time is now 12:02, so we are going to get started. Thank you so much for being here on time. Just a few logistical items before we get the presentation started today. All phone lines have been muted and will continue to be muted throughout the presentation, so we do ask that any questions you have to post them in the chat box. We will have some time for a question and answer period at the end of today's presentation. A copy of today's PowerPoint slide presentation was attached to the reminder email you received this morning. It will also be available in the survey that you're going to see after the presentation concludes, and will also be attached to a follow-up email that you will receive, as well as any additional materials from today's presentation. A recording of today's presentation will also be available a few days after for anyone who can't join us for the full time or anyone that missed us. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lorianne Castell, our Director of Prevention here at NYSCDV, to talk a little bit about the project and about Rebecca Milliman.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so glad I have you to handle the logistics. Good morning, everyone. Actually, good afternoon. It's still morning in Seattle, Washington, where our presenter is. Thank you so much for joining us for our annual Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month webinar. We try to do this every year for prevention educators and prevention coordinators among the domestic violence and sexual assault community here in New York State, bringing you information about innovative prevention strategies for addressing teen dating violence and prevention. So I just wanted to introduce our presenter today and provide a little bit of background on our promotion of this particular program and this approach and why we think it's so important. Our presenter, Rebecca Milliman, is the Prevention and Education Coordinator at the Harborview Center for Sexual Assault and Traumatic Stress in Seattle, Washington. We did bring her into New York for our Prevention Summit in 2017 to present on Athletes as Leaders, just as they were beginning to pilot it in schools. And so she's going to be able to share with you today not only the nuts and bolts of the program, but also some findings from that first pilot. Rebecca is the chief architect and visionary behind Athletes as Leaders, and she came to my attention, well, we met at a meeting of advocates in Washington, D.C., gosh, I think it was in 2017, that was convened by a newly formed national organization called Reliance with an A, which was made possible by the NFL and was created to address sexual assault and intimate partner violence in the sports industry. So they are looking at strategies from T-ball and Little League all the way to big million-dollar industry sports like the NFL, like Major League Baseball, hockey and basketball. So very exciting times. And Rebecca was working with Futures Without Violence at that time to create a counterpart and a complement to Coaching Boys into Men. And you know that NYSCDV has always been a big promoter of Coaching Boys into Men ever since it was designed back in the early 2000s. But for a very long time, people were saying, you know, what about the girls? And, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you might have heard me saying, well, what about the girls? You know, we're really focusing on stopping perpetration of gender-based violence at this time. And so that's why we're sort of focusing on masculinity and we're focusing on engaging boys and men. But it's an intriguing question, isn't it, to think about, well, what kind of programming are we doing for girls that complements, it is a counterpart to what we're doing for men and boys. And so Rebecca is very good at talking about, you know, how all of this came about and answering the question, what about the girls, right? So I don't want to steal any more time from our presenter. So without further ado, Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Lorianne. I really appreciate that introduction. And actually, that's wonderful because that's exactly what I was going to say. to introduce this program. So can you all hear me okay? Could a couple people just type in the chat if the audio sounds okay on my end? And we'll go ahead and get started. So can you hear me, Lorianne?
I can. You sound great.
Okay, great. So I'll just go ahead and jump right in. So again, my name is Rebecca Milliman, and I'm here in Seattle. We're a couple hours earlier than you all, and it is sunny yet very cold for us in the low 30s. And I'm sure it's a lot colder where some of you are, but for us this is really cold. And I work at a local sexual assault program, which provides direct services and crisis support to survivors of sexual assault and other forms of trauma. And I am the prevention staff here. And as Lorianne said, I've been actively working with the Coaching Boys into Men program at a local high school and have created this program, Athletes as Leaders, as a complement to Coaching Boys into Men. And what we're going to do today on the webinar is we are going to cover some of the key messages of the curriculum and how the structure of the program works. I'm also going to share some of the outcomes of the recent national evaluation. We're going to take a whole section of the webinar to really talk more deeply about how to get the program up and running in your community. So that starts with how to build relationships, and I'll also talk about how you can kind of try to get buy-in from potential stakeholders and assess community readiness. So we're going to start with a video, and what we're going to do, hopefully this will work, is we're going to have everyone watch it on their own, and we're going to put the link for this video. It's called Sisters in Sweat, and we're going to put that into the chat now, and you can click on the link. It should open up a new window for you, and we'll have you watch that on your own. Hopefully this will be less glitchy than watching it through the webinar software. And then once you have a chance to click on that, I will pause for a couple minutes just to allow everyone a chance to watch the video, and then we will discuss. So let's see. Okay, so if you scroll down on the chat, the link is there. Go ahead and watch it, and I will pause for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, so hopefully everyone had the chance to watch Sisters in Sweat featuring Serena Williams, and I love this video to kind of start off the conversation so we can think more broadly about so many of the pro-social benefits that sports offer to young women and to all young people. So for those of you who have participated in sports at some point in your life, or someone very closely to you, let's say, who has participated in sports, what have been some of the positive impacts that sports have had for you? Go ahead and type into the chat box your response to this question. So what lessons have you learned from sports that have helped you in life, or what kind of positive impact has sports had? So someone said teamwork. Learning never to give up. Clear communication, goal setting, self-discipline. I've learned how to be a team player, leadership, tendencies, and confidence. That's awesome. Focus. Challenge yourself and your abilities. The art of losing. That is so important as a life lesson. Mental toughness, competition, commitment, sportsmanship. Determination. Great. So as we can tell from all of your comments, sports in general, and there's been a lot of research on this, we know that sports do have a huge benefit, particularly to young women, but to everyone. And a lot of the reasons you have listed here, but we also see a lot of other pro-social benefits to young people, which includes not only physical health, but also academic success. And anyone who's having trouble with the audio, here is the phone number for you to dial in. And it might have been a little strange when we were paused that I was being quiet. So hopefully you're back on with us. So I wanted to briefly talk about Coaching Boys and Men, just in case you're not familiar with that program. So this is a program that has been created by Futures Without Violence, and it's been around, I believe, about 12 years and is used in hundreds, if not thousands, of high schools and athletic organizations across the country. So the way this program is designed is the coaches are the ones to deliver the 12 lessons to their athletes, and they address topics such as, bragging about sexual reputation in the locker room, what does personal responsibility mean to you, and accountability to the team. They talk really explicitly about sexual assault and dating violence, defining what that means and talking about how that is not okay. It's actually an evidence-based program, which is really amazing because it's a kind of a brief intervention. The conversations are only about 15 minutes a week, but they have followed kids who have gone through this program, and they have found that it is proven to prevent the onset of perpetration behaviors, and it really also encourages male athletes to be leaders in the community, to model respectful behavior, and to speak up about violence against women. And so that leads me to the creation of Athletes as Leaders, and I think Lorianne gave a great introduction, and I'll just add a couple more notes. So I am managing a RPE, which stands for Rape Prevention and Education Grant project here in Seattle at one local high school. And the school right off the bat was very interested in implementing Coaching Boys into Men as one of our many strategies that we're using in this comprehensive project. And at first we were thinking about just doing it with one team, but the leadership of the school really wanted to do it with every team. And as soon as the principal said that, I realized very quickly, if we're going to be doing this with every boys team, we really need to be doing something with every girls team as well. And like Lorianne said, of course, engaging men and boys is a best practice. We know that they are more at risk to perpetrate violence, gender-based violence, and they also do have a lot of social capital, especially when you think about young male athletes at a high school. But should we only be engaging them? And, very quickly when you start implementing this program, many of you on the call, I'm sure all are already aware, the schools or teams very quickly will ask you, what are we going to do about the girls? And my response to that is that we should be engaging all genders in this leadership opportunity, which is how we are marketing these programs. And not only is this a legal requirement under Title IX to be, providing the same opportunities for everyone, but it really is a best practice to be engaging all genders. And I would argue that athletes on girls' teams also have social capital at a high school, and of course, they deeply understand some of the issues that we're talking about: sexism, rape culture, sexual harassment. Most of them experience this personally and on a very regular basis. So their voices really should be uplifted and promoted as leaders in the community when we're talking about these issues. So just like coaching boys and men is just one strategy, I hope that athletes as leaders can also be, you would find it as a useful strategy if you are doing primary prevention efforts, particularly with athletes or with high school age youth. So I want to specifically just recognize, as I try to do with most of my presentations, that I really want to recognize locally Garfield High School. They were very instrumental in starting up this program. And, we had a group of youth, particularly our first pilot group, which was the girls basketball team and the girls wrestling team, and they really helped us shape the program with what the content should look like. And so I would always like to recognize them when I'm talking about the program. I will forever be grateful to them. And very quickly, we got a lot of interest nationally, and so we wanted to make this program available to everyone free of charge. And so our website's athletesleaders.org. You can access it for free for download on the website. So what is Athletes as Leaders? So it's a program that is it's about developing student athletes as leaders. We encourage the athletes to play an active role in creating a safe and supportive community, not only on their teams, but also in the wider school community. It is based on research and best practices in our field in sexual assault prevention and dating violence prevention. And we really recommend it as a complement to other programs that involve men and boys in active prevention efforts. So I do endorse the Coaching Boys into Men program. It was intended as a complement, but if you're not using that, it should be used in conjunction with another program that's intentionally engaging boys. And the reason why is because it would be a problem if we were only targeting girls, right, with this information. The onus should not be on them to prevent gender-based violence alone, that they need, everyone as part of this active effort. And so unless you're in like an all-girls school, for example, it really should be used in conjunction with another program. So when designing this program, I was really thinking deeply about some of the unique issues that girls face, and particularly high school girls and high school student athletes. So we know that girls, we've come a long way, but girls are still really subjective to a lot of negative messages about their gender, and a lot of this is rooted in traditional gender stereotypes that teach girls both subtly and explicitly that they should be polite, that they should be submissive when it comes to relationships, that they should not take up too much space, that they need to be perfect in all things. So these student athletes oftentimes feel a lot of pressure to excel in school, excel in sports, excel socially, and constantly be active on social media. We also know that social media can be an asset for many, but also a huge detriment. Rumors, back in the day before social media, rumors were spread word of mouth. Now they spread like wildfire. And, most of the time when we're talking about negative rumors about girls, they often are related to their sexual history or their sexuality or their perceived sexual activity, and it can be incredibly damaging. We also know that there's a lot of pressure about the way that they look. A lot of value is placed on their physical appearance. There's a lot of pressure to have, your hair, your skin, your makeup, your clothes, your nails always look the right way and present this particular image of femininity. And again, I think athletes themselves have come a long way in defying some of these stereotypes and really challenging them. I mean, this whole generation has come a lot further than any generation before them, but there are still a lot of pressures on girls. And when you think about when it comes to rape culture, thinking very uniquely about the ways that girls themselves do contribute to rape culture. And we have to be very nuanced about that discussion, because I don't want to lead into a conversation where girls are victim blamed or blamed for their own assault. But there are, my position is that there are some unique ways that girls and female identified youth do uniquely contribute. And with that said, we also want to avoid some of those traditional messages that are put on them when we talk about quote unquote rape prevention that tends to be more of a risk reduction approach. So what I'm talking about is how girls uniquely contribute to things such as slut shaming, body shaming, girl-on-girl harassment, rumor spreading, online harassment through social media, victim blaming when you do hear that someone was sexually assaulted or abused by a partner. And when you want to dig even deeper, thinking about how those negative stereotypes and gender roles are reinforced by girls, not only on other girls, but also on boys. So for example, when a boy shows any kind of weakness, let's say maybe he is crying about something and he's called some kind of awful name because he's showing vulnerability that's attacking his masculinity. So let's say he's called a pussy, or he's called weak, or he's called a girl, acting like a girl. It is not always men and boys who are saying that to a young man. It is sometimes girls and women. And so we talk about even that in the program, about how they can be models for healthy gender norms when it comes to all genders. So these are some of the unique things when I was designing the program that I really wanted to keep in mind and kind of avoid those traditional risk reduction messages that tend to be aimed at girls. And, you know, I probably don't need to go into that too much, but it just puts too much onus on women to prevent their own assault. And it tends to, you know, kind of lead to these attitudes that blame them for assault in the first place and don't really put the onus on where it should be, which is the perpetrators, and putting the onus on prevention for preventing perpetration. Okay, so we're going to watch another video. This is the only other video we are going to watch, but especially for those of you who are not familiar with this program or haven't seen this video, I think the best way to learn about it is to hear from the athletes themselves who have gone through the program. So again, in the chat box at the bottom, you're going to see the link to the video. So go ahead and click on that. I'm going to give you a little over 3 minutes, and I'll just be quiet. And go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll come back together to learn more. All right, looks like a lot of people are done. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and talk about the goals of the program. So as you might have seen from the video, it feels very empowering, and I think to a lot of participants it doesn't necessarily feel like a sexual assault prevention program. It feels more like an empowerment program where we really encourage the athletes to empower each other rather than bringing each other down. When we talk about girls supporting each other, and when we support this kind of strong, positive culture amongst the team and encourage them to think about how that kind of attitude around teamwork and approach to teamwork can spread to the larger community, we believe that that advances us toward gender equity. And ultimately, sexual violence will be less likely to occur when we are all aiming for gender equity and a supportive environment, particularly for people who have experienced oppression. And we encourage the athletes themselves to be role models in the school and to speak up as leaders around these issues. One of the differences from coaching boys into men is that we are really kind of looking at the athletes themselves to create and set the new social norms for their team. So it's not so much coach-led in this program. It is more athlete-led. The facilitator is what we call the mentor, and they're kind of encouraging the athletes to come up with the social norms that they want to set for their team. And there's this level of accountability to each other. I mean, also to the coach, but the coach doesn't play as central of a role in this program compared to coaching boys into men. So the program structure is very similar, and it fits into a typical high school sports season, which is going to be 10 sessions. And that, at least here, is a typical sports season. And as you probably know, the sports seasons go very quickly because oftentimes you have tryouts at the beginning and then you have championships at the end. So we really try to fit it into more of that regular season when they do have more time. The sessions are once a week, designed to be once a week for 20 minutes. And they're meant to be done during the team's practice time. So the message is that this is part of the program, this is part of practice, this is an expectation for all team members to be there. And the facilitators are female identified mentors. And the reason I put an asterisk there is because I want to kind of explain that a little bit further. So what I realized, at least locally, very quickly, was that a lot of our girls' teams here are coached by men or male identified coaches. And because this program is addressing some really sensitive topics with athletes, including sexual assault, body image, internalized sexism, we felt that because of this, women or folks who have experienced female socialization, so that's not necessarily only female identified folks, it could be non-binary folks as well, they might have a higher comfort level discussing some of these topics and a deeper understanding of these issues because they've experienced them personally. Athletes might feel, and they have told us in our focus groups, that they do feel more at ease often having the discussion space just for girls and women. And so while we recognize that many girls' teams are coached by men, we wanted to partner with, get creative about who the mentor could be. So who could help facilitate these groups. And what we say for that is that, there's a whole section on our website in the implementation guide where you can look at some of our kind of recommendations for the ideal characteristics and how you can recruit and locate who an appropriate mentor would be. But oftentimes the team and the coach or the athletes themselves can help identify who would be the best person. So in our programs, we have had someone like me, like a sexual assault prevention person, be the facilitator, domestic violence prevention advocate. We've had really good luck with high school alumni and former athletes coming back to do community service and be the facilitator. We've had college athletes do it as an internship. We have had graduate students who are majoring in related fields. You could have the head coach, you could have the assistant coach, and we've even had team captains themselves. So athletes themselves do the actual leadership of the program. I would recommend it athletes who have gone through it before, but it could definitely be athletes themselves. Okay, so I want to just pause here and just see if we have any questions so far. And while we're waiting for folks to type in any questions that you might have, I wanted to point out our website. So our website is athletesasleaders.org, and I'm going to be referring throughout the webinar to a bunch of tools that are on our website. So at the top, you can see that there's different tabs, and we have lots of supporting resources. In addition to just the curriculum itself or the program itself, we have lots of tools for advocates, for mentors, and for teams. So I'm going to pause here and just see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like any so far, so I will keep moving on, but feel free to type those in or save them to the end. It's up to you. Okay, so we have these three terms that I want to clarify. So the mentor, again, is the person who builds the relationship with the team and facilitates the sessions with the athletes. So it's your facilitator. The advocate is someone like me, or probably someone like you, who is the preventionist or the advocate, and they are usually the content experts. They usually have a lot more background training in sexual assault, domestic violence. They're often your trainer, so they're going to train the mentor, train the coach, make sure everyone is trained up and has the background that they need to facilitate this program. And they're in charge of kind of building those key relationships, like meeting with the principal, meeting with the athletic director, meeting with the coach to get this up and running. And they're kind of the overall coordinator of the program. Now, sometimes, like in my case, I have been both the advocate and the mentor. So sometimes you are playing multiple roles here. And then the coach is obviously usually the head coach of the team. They are usually your team admin person. We expect the coach to reinforce the messages and the key concepts of the program, whether or not they are directly involved with this facilitation or not. We expect them to be on board with the key concepts, and I'll talk about the resources we have for that. And then they're also your kind of connection to the team parents. We want to make sure that we are connecting at least minimal information about the program with the parents of the athletes. Okay, so I'm going to pause and answer this question: how can you become a facilitator? So a great way is to start with taking this webinar that you're on today, and this will also be recorded for folks who were not able to attend. But on our website, we actually have another recorded webinar that is a full Train the Trainer for mentors. So if you go to our website, you will find it on the buttons, but I'll also tell you it's just athletesasleaders.org/training, and you'll see on there the full training for advocates and the full training for mentors. Okay, so moving on. Here are some of the tools that we offer for advocates. I'm assuming most of you on the call would be in the advocate role. And so what you're going to find on this page, if you click on the Advocate tab, you're going to find an implementation guide, which is your whole start to finish, everything you need to know to get this program up and running. You're going to find the background information, which we should all be familiar with, because sometimes people will ask us, well, why are you talking about gender so much when really this is about sexual assault or domestic violence? The background information really gives you the research, which is the foundational basis to this project. So it will help us answer those questions of, why is this considered research-based? And that's, again, in background information. We also have a recommended policy guide. So we want to make sure that the organizations and schools we're working with can have some specific policies around prevention and around appropriate response when there is a sexual assault reported or an incident of dating violence. So there's some recommended policies there. And it even comes down to policies that also promote gender equity. We also have a sample parent letter that coaches can send home to families before they implement the program. And then we also have evaluation tools. So that's many of the resources that are available there. And again, everything's for free for download, so feel free to check that out after the webinar. So I'm going to talk about the program itself, and these are the program sessions and topics that we're specifically doing with the athletes. So we, have the 10 sessions. I'll just give you a little taste of maybe 3 of them. So privilege and oppression in session 3, we talk about how people who have privilege can really use their platform to speak up against things that are not fair or not equal. And when we talk about privilege and oppression, we talk specifically about gender, we talk about race, we talk about sexual orientation, we talk about different identities that people have, but also even in a high school setting. You think about the popular kids, you think about the athletes, you think about kids that are in advanced programs, you think about staff and administration. Those are also people that hold privilege in a high school setting. So we talk about that and using that to speak out, using that privilege to speak up for things that are not fair. In session 8, for example, we talk about messages about manhood and how society teaches all of us that men are supposed to be strong at all times. They're supposed to protect women. They're supposed to be the breadwinner. They're not supposed to be emotional. And we learn we kind of teach young women how to kind of challenge some of those messages and how those can be really damaging to all genders. And then in session 9, we talk about girl positivity. So in other words, this is the session where we talk about kind of reframing some of that jealousy that sometimes girls face into admiration, how we can turn this culture into kind of more supportive of girls and women, and how treating each other better, focusing on our strengths, and just really in the end letting girls and women be who they really want to be, not setting limitations because of someone's gender or because of who they are. And this is another difference from Coaching Boys and Men. We do use videos. A lot of them are YouTube videos that many of you have probably already seen. It takes a lot of the pressure off the facilitator to say the perfect script because a lot of these videos are awesome and they do a great job of introducing the topic. And so you do need the ability to show technology. And when we don't have that, sometimes we literally just have some of the athletes pull out a phone and they all crowd around a couple phones. But when you can be in a classroom setting, it's great if you can show it on a projector, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Then they have the facilitated discussion and talking points from the mentor after watching the video. And then the cool down is where they do the team talk. We have them get into a huddle or a circle and set the new team norm. And this is all through a facilitated question and answer with the group. So again, this is all free online. If you click on the program, you can see the sessions week by week, and you can also click on the video links directly. At the very bottom, you can't see it here, but on the website, you can actually click on the complete program and just download the entire thing. You don't have to click on session by session and then put it into a binder. We even have a binder cover that you can print out and make it look nice and pretty. Okay, so I wanted to spend the second half on the webinar about how to really get this up and started in the community. And before I do that, I would like to pause again and see if anyone has any specific questions about the program. So I'll wait, and while I wait, I'll talk, because that's what I tend to do. So I just want to recommend the best resource for this discussion is going to be the Implementation Guide for Advocates. That would be under the Advocate tab, and it's really a step-by-step guide. And that will cover a lot of what is in the second part of this webinar. My best advice to you, and a lot of you probably already know this who are doing prevention work in the community, but my best advice is to actually not do what I did on this particular project and instead really, really start small. I have always found in my work doing community development and community mobilization that it is always best to start small. You start with that one champion who is on board, who quote unquote gets it, and maybe that is with one team, maybe even a really, really small team. We've worked with some teams that only have, 5 female identified athletes, and you can start anywhere. So you have maybe a group of athletes who really wants to get this going, or you have that one parent who has contacted you and said, hey, I really want this for my child's team, or ideally you have a coach or an athletic director who you have built a relationship with, and you want to recommend that let's just start with one team. And in fact, in this case, I say let's just start with one boys team and one girls team. Let's try out Coaching Boys and Men and Athletes as Leaders, and the movement can build from there. once you have your champion and you have a local successful example, it is so much easier to build the movement from there. So that's my best advice. And we'll talk specifically about how to build relationships. So as all of you know, and yet we don't really often have designated funding for this, but prevention work really begins with relationships. We have to build in a large chunk of time of our FTE to nurture those relationships. And sometimes it's continuing relationships that have already been started. When I started this job even about, over 10 years ago, I was even kind of meeting, the person in the position prior had actually given me, the contact information for all the relationships she had built in the schools. And so I started out my job by just going and meeting with these folks that she had started to build relationships with. So you're building on what's already been started, but you're also proactively going out there and finding, a coach who you think might be interested. Maybe this is somebody who is a friend of a friend, or maybe this is someone who the school counselor has recommended. But whatever the case is, I have always put a lot of effort into developing these relationships. Now, in this case, it would be with leadership at the school. So when I started a large grant like this, I did meet with the principal and the assistant principals, the school counselor, and the athletic director. And it could also be meeting with individual coaches, parents, staff, and others. You just never really know who might end up being the strongest supporter. I always start with just requesting a short 30-minute meeting. I always say it's going to be 30 minutes because people don't often feel that they have more time than that. And I always offer to go where they are. So I don't have them come to my office. I will meet them at the school or a convenient location. In Seattle, often that's a coffee shop, but it could really be anywhere that's very convenient for them. So I usually send them a quick introductory email first and encourage them to watch the 1-minute promotional video. Again, the video you watched is 3 minutes, and people don't even have time for that. So send them to the 1-minute video, which is on our front main page of the website. And so when the program will really work best when you do have buy-in from leaders at the school, if you possibly can get that. So for a school, this could mean administrators or athletic directors. For a sports organization, this could mean the head coach or the organizational leadership. Sometimes these folks are really hard to contact, and you don't always need a high-level administrator on board, so you can always start small, like I said. You want to recruit coaches who have interest in implementing this with their team. And as you probably know, those of you who are coaches or who have worked with coaches, they're really exceptional people. I mean, almost all the coaches I work with are doing it because they truly, love working with young people. They want to give back. A lot of the ones here locally are alumni of that high school. I feel like a lot of them go really above and beyond for their athletes, and they do really care deeply about them as people, not just as athletes, but they do care about character development on and off the field. A lot of our high school coaches are not paid well, and you have to kind of acknowledge that going in, that with the, defying maybe what some of our stereotypes are about coaches, that really it's not about winning. When you actually ask them, a lot of them it is about mentorship. And so this just fits right in with their approach to coaching for the most part. And you also want to think about parents and caregivers, and I don't think I'm a great example of partnering with parents and caregivers, but they should at very least be notified that their athletes are going to be doing this program. We do have a sample parent letter that you can send home. And then other ideas for engaging parents include, asking the coach if you can attend the preseason parent meeting. A lot of coaches will have a meeting for the parents right when the season starts or right before. They might have a parent education night, or you can ask if you can plan one. You can send home prevention materials. You can ask coaches to put it in a newsletter if they have one. And you can also even ask parent volunteers to help facilitate the groups if that is a need. And then other staff that you can try to get on board, like at the school I'm working in, I have asked the principal if we can do, training for the rest of the school, for all the school staff, for the paraprofessionals, the faculty, etc. And he actually, one thing he wanted me to do once we were 2 years into the project was come in and actually present on coaching boys and men and athletes as leaders and talk about how the key concepts from these programs can actually be integrated into an academic classroom setting. So that was really neat. So if you're able to kind of devote that level of FTE into one particular school, it might evolve into engaging other relationships with other staff beyond athletics. But at the very least, ideally all staff in any organization or school should have basic training on sexual assault. They should be definitely made aware of the procedures for reporting disclosures should they happen. Okay, I'm going to pause and answer this question. So how do you address transgender athletes who are on a female athletic team but may not necessarily identify themselves as female or have different views on the challenges females experience, or non-binary athletes? That's a great question. So I think, first of all, there's the policy and then there's the practice. So I think, first of all, you want to definitely be aware of what the policy is with transgender athletes. So I work within Seattle Public Schools, and I am familiar with the policy there, which is that transgender athletes, or athletes in general, can play on the team that most closely matches their gender identity, not their sex that was assigned at birth, but their gender identity. So a transgender woman would be able to play on a woman's team, for example. And non-binary athletes, and for those of you who are not aware with that term, non-binary refers to folks who kind of reject the idea that gender is only male or female, or men or women. It's commonly known that gender is a spectrum, and so non-binary folks might feel like somewhere in between, that they don't necessarily identify as only a man or only a woman. And so again, those athletes should be playing on the team that most closely matches their gender identity. And so in other words, our local school district here has a liberal policy, but regardless, you should know what the policy is, and you actually become a resource, because I've had actually people ask me that directly, because not everyone is familiar with the policy. And then in practice, I always what I tell the athletes is that we want to be inclusive of everyone in the group, and this program is designed specifically for non-binary and for folks who identify as girls, who, in general, athletes who play on girls' teams. But particularly, for example, when you're doing the program with a co-ed team or an all-gender team, like, for example, wrestling here is all-gender team. And so what we do when we're implementing both coaching boys and men and athletes as leaders is we just allow the athlete to pick which group they feel more comfortable in. And, we would literally discuss that explicitly with them so they feel safe and comfortable with the group that they pick. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm happy to talk further about that too. Okay, so I want to move on to pro tips. Now, these pro tips actually came from the athletic director herself. So I asked her, what does she recommend to advocates who want to really get in touch with athletic directors who sometimes can be hard to catch. So she really recommended a face-to-face meeting is definitely the best option. If the AD would like you to make an appointment, she said to definitely do that and confirm the appointment the day before and to show up early. She said voice calls are better than emails, but not necessarily leaving a voicemail, but to call if you can a few times to try to catch them rather than email. She said that she just receives hundreds of emails all the time from people requesting them to contact them and trying to sell them things and promote different programs. And so what she was saying was the best time to reach them is also to think about the time of year. So definitely preseason is always going to be best. At least for her, she said in between fall and winter sports is a great time to catch them. And then also in late May, which here is after all the state tournaments. So if maybe you're thinking about piloting this next school year, maybe this May, late May after your state tournaments, or maybe in New York it's different. It could be early May or early June. But find out when the state tournaments end and then use that timeline to try to catch the AD because they might have a little bit more capacity. And now that we have these programs up and running, regularly at this local school, and we're starting to spread to other local high schools, one thing that I do is I go in and I present at the preseason coaches meeting. So most athletic directors each season will have a preseason meeting for all their coaches. And so you can ask if you can be on the agenda for that to pitch the program. Okay, so how to get buy-in from stakeholders. So first of all, I really recommend that we understand the context of the sports program. So the coaches' roles, how much they get paid, all the requirements, the mandates, the lack of resources. So I have learned a lot on this project, just about everything that is required of coaches. It's really unbelievable what they require coaches to do. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of training. These coaches there's a lot of liability because kids can get really severely injured playing sports. And so they have them go through all these trainings and screenings. And they should, right? But we also have to realize that these are not elite, wealthy athletic organizations. These are public high schools most often, and the coaches are not paid that well. And you should just look on your district's website and see if they have any job openings and just look at the pay scale. I think it's important to kind of keep all this in mind. So I really always recommend to offer athletes as leaders and coaching boys and men as an opportunity rather than a mandate. So once you have a success with one team, the organization or school can kind of build momentum from there. Sometimes when people hear about this, they're like, we should be making all our coaches do this. Like all teams have to do this. This is like really, really important. And that's great. But let me tell you, that is a ton of work to kind of be then chasing after people who now are required to do it, who don't necessarily have the capacity or want to do it. So I really recommend offering it as an opportunity. And then if there's any way you can provide incentives, that's even better. So celebrating, acknowledging, and rewarding people who have done the program is, to me, my opinion, the best approach. You can also talk about statistics, how often this issue affects young people. You can talk about current high school cases that have been in the news, the Me Too movement. I mean, there's so much going on locally and nationally with our issues. So it does seem like it's a really right time to engage non-traditional partners. And a lot of them really do want to do something, and they don't know what to do. And so this is kind of something that gives them an easy way to get involved that is accessible. You want to explain the benefits of the program. This is what Lorianne wanted me to talk about specifically. So how to share data with stakeholders, and I'll talk about that next. But some of the other benefits to the program besides the outcomes is this can actually attract positive attention to your team, right? We've actually locally had some media coverage of some of our local teams doing the program, which is awesome. And it can really help build a strong character and leadership amongst their athletes. Most coaches are definitely going to want to get on board with that idea. And I also, talk about just how we're not just preparing them for college, but we're preparing them for life. And we're not just preparing them to excel in sports, but to excel in school and in relationships. And what's really awesome is if you can have athletes who have already done the program come and speak with you if you're trying to pitch the program. And I'll just share with you a couple quotes that athletes at my local school have said. So one athlete said, "I have become a more positive person on and off the court." So that's a very powerful statement. If you can bring in a statement like that, or have an athlete themselves come and speak to the stakeholder, that's extremely powerful. Another athlete said, "Girls know that they are just as important as men, and they can be and do whatever they want." And then another athlete said, "I think we are all a lot more conscientious about how we treat each other. So again, this is going to appeal to most coaches. They're going to want to be part of that when they hear the benefits. Okay, and so I guess one of the keys to my success, as I said locally, was that we did have the principal on board from the very beginning, and he wanted these programs for the entire athletics department. And so I would really suggest trying to enlist high-level leadership when you can, because their job is to see the impact on the entire student body. And he's actually really made it the expectation for all teams to participate, but it's been a process over several years of doing that. So we're in our 4th year now of this project. And I will also add that it really helps to show coaches and the athletic director that you really have a lot of enthusiasm. So I think just being enthusiastic going into those meetings, stressing how the student athletes play a leadership role in creating that positive school climate, because a lot of principals really care about school climate and school culture. Those are kind of buzzwords. A lot of schools have surveys around that, so they're going to care about that. And since athletes tend to be kind of kids that have that social status, they can really help you with that. And you can leverage that social capital that they have. And you could also make it part of your athletic mission. You can include it in your parent handbook or your student handbook. And so all of these things kind of help integrate it into the larger school setting. Okay, and then I'm going to talk about our evaluation results, the data that you can share. But lastly, really quickly, I wanted to discuss number 3 before you get started with the program, how to assess that readiness. So readiness means how much capacity do they have to embark on this program. We don't want to be too ambitious and set them up for failure. I have gone into communities where they can't even say the word sex. They can't say the word rape. We have heard from communities that for some reason have a lot easier time getting coaching boys and men up and running than they do athletes as leaders with the girls team. They're still taboo talking about these topics with girls. And so you do have to require some level of readiness to be able to embark on this program. If they're just really not ready to engage in prevention, then they need to take a couple steps back and kind of start with the awareness building, right? So many of our communities are really, really ready. They're ready to go. And then others might need to kind of start with a less ambitious approach to just talking about the issue, acknowledging that it's an issue, and spreading awareness, more of a 101 level. And I do have some more information on the implementation guide for how to assess readiness. We also want to make sure that they have a protocol to respond to sexual assault when it is reported. It's so hard, as you probably know, when you're doing prevention and education, and then all of a sudden you do have a sexual assault case at the community, and then it's just handled incredibly poorly. Sometimes I feel like that undoes a lot of the work we're trying to do. And so we want to be proactive about having them look at their policies, having them feel prepared that they have a good, robust system and process to respond when someone, and support when someone reports a sexual assault or dating violence. We also want to make sure that in an all-gender school that the boys' teams are also committed to implementing a program with the boys' teams. As we discussed earlier, it is problematic to only do this with girls' teams, so we want to make sure that they have that commitment as well. And you want to learn about what kind of resources already exist and maybe what some of the gaps or concerns are. I always like to know if there's been a case, a high-profile case that's maybe been in the news. So you want to Google that. You want to talk to them about, has there been a concern here? Has there been any incidences? And sometimes they are bringing you in maybe after an event has occurred, and that's okay. I think sometimes it is reactive, but really that can really start the ball rolling for getting prevention going. Sometimes it does take a bad thing happening to get people to care and to get people to invest in prevention. And my opinion is that's okay. And so but you do want to understand the context that you're walking into. You want to make sure everyone's really aware about your local program that's there to serve survivors as well. And lastly, I'll just say there's this model called the Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Model. You can Google that. It's also in our implementation guide, and I highly recommend that when you get started to officially assess and rate that community and how ready they are to engage in prevention. It's called the Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Model. Okay, so I want to talk lastly about evaluation and data, because as Lorianne and I were discussing when we planned this webinar, data and outcomes and results are some of the best ways to engage potential stakeholders. A lot of high-level administrators are getting more savvy and will quickly ask you, well, it seems great. I watched the video, seems like a good program, but does this actually have an impact? Is this actually making any kind of difference? And so that's what we're going to talk about next. Before I do that, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions I've missed in the chat. Lorianne or Jennifer, if you see any, feel free to.
The only question that I saw come through the chat is a question about if we would be able to share the questions and answers that we've had throughout the webinar. We will be able to share the chat logs after the webinar with just the questions and answers, as well as the responses from the question that you posed earlier about the responses around what athletics meant.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and I'll pause for another couple of seconds to see if anyone else has any questions before I jump into evaluation results. Excuse me. So we recently embarked on a national pilot, and we have the results that we have ready to share, that you are welcome to share with any community who you are meeting with. And just so you know, we also have all the tools that were used on the evaluation, like the pre and the post survey, on our website. And here's the direct link here. Okay, so our national evaluation took place last year. We were fortunate to have Dr. Liz Miller and her colleagues, including Summer Millfish Miller, who worked on this project, and we were really thankful to have them. And Dr. Miller was the lead researcher on the randomized controlled trial with Coaching Boys into Men. And so I was really grateful because she had all that background knowledge about Coaching Boys into Men, and is just really an amazing guru when it comes to researching and looking at what programs are evidence-based in our field. And so they designed the evaluation, and that was out of the University of Pittsburgh. And in the end, we had a ton of interest, and we had more teams start than finish, but ultimately we had 12 teams that started and finished, and it was a total of 268 athletes, and they were in 8 states. So we had high school teams from Reno, Nevada, Longmont, Colorado, Cathlamet, Washington, and Seattle, Washington, Berryville, Arkansas, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Hays, Kansas, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Jackson, Wyoming. What our results showed was we had statistically significant improvement in 3 key areas. So first, there was a statistically significant improvement from pre to post survey in the athletes reporting their ability to identify abusive behaviors. So they were given these specific behaviors, and they had to rate them. How abusive is this behavior in a relationship? For example, someone making fun of somebody in front of other people, or someone spreading sexual rumors about somebody. So they had an increased ability to identify these these specific, behaviors, whether they're abusive or not abusive. And next, Lorian, I see your question, and I will definitely respond to that. Next, we saw an improved belief in gender equity. So there was this scale on kind of these gender-related statements, and for example, some of those were girls should have the same freedoms as guys. It is all right for a girl to ask a guy out on a date. And we saw an increased belief that girls are equal to boys from pre to post. And lastly, increased self-image and confidence. And what we mean by that was we had some specific survey items that asked the athletes about their ability to kind of challenge some of the harmful messages that we talk about in society, that we talk about throughout the program, and how confident they feel in being able to change some of the attitudes amongst their peers and being able to have a positive influence on the school culture. So some of the survey items included, I feel like I can challenge the stereotype that girls are weak and inferior, and our team can help create a safe and welcoming school environment. So just to be clear, these are just sample survey items, but there were many more questions under each of these categories. So you can see the full pre and post survey if you go to our website under evaluation tools, and you'll find both of them, and you're welcome to use them. I have been asked by several people, we are not ourselves collecting data right now from any sites nationally, but I'm happy to share the tools that we have, and you can do kind of data analysis on your own. And a lot of that can help you pitch this program, because sometimes people will want to see what results you've had locally so far, but you're also really welcome to use these results that I'm sharing with you now nationally. And there's a really nice infographic that we have. Actually, when you first click on the main page of our website, there's a nice one-page infographic that really shows this program in a nutshell. And these are just cut and pasted from that. So feel free to take that with you when you meet with people. It gives you a nice overview of the program itself, but more importantly, the impact that it has. And Lorian was asking about the difference between doing just a post test and then versus doing a pre and a post test. And I am really interested in that question also, and I have used different evaluation approaches depending on the context. To be honest, we locally, a lot of times specifically when our funders are not asking for a super rigorous evaluation, we sometimes just do a post survey. And as you probably know, some of the benefits of just doing a post survey is that it doesn't take nearly as much time. It's hard on session one to be really engaging with youth when the first thing you have them do is fill out a survey. Sometimes youth are kind of resistant to that, and you don't want it to take up too much time. And there's also some research that I'm happy to share via email, if you email me, that our evaluation consultant shared with me, that actually shows that sometimes it is fairly accurate on a very, very short-term program like this to do what they call a retrospective pre-survey. So on that, what you're doing is at completion of the program, you're asking them, what were your attitudes and beliefs before the program? And then what are your attitudes and beliefs after the program? So you have them report both at post-test. I have used that sometimes, especially when it's not required to do anything further than that, and I just feel like it takes up a lot less time with your athletes when you're only given 20 minutes by the coaches. Now, on the national evaluation, of course, we wanted to do something much more rigorous. There is a lot of research that shows that a pre and a post test in general is much more rigorous and going to give you much more accurate results than a retrospective pre-survey. So in general, when you're talking about in the research world, in the evaluation world, a pre and a post is always going to be more rigorous and more accurate than just a post. And I think it just gives you a lot more information. So on the national evaluation, we did ask all the sites to do the full pre and the full post. And it does take a while, but it is very, very interesting to see. And then you can actually tell if these were statistically significant, and luckily they were on these 3 categories. So we were thrilled to see that, because I felt like, okay, wow, this is actually telling us a lot more than just a post survey. I also think it's really powerful to have some open-ended, what we call qualitative data too. So that would be the athletes giving them open-ended questions about what they thought about the program and the impact that it's had on them. So these are some quotes actually from our national. So these were not local, these were national from athletes all over the country. And I don't have this one on here, but there was even a couple athletes who said, this was the first time I've ever talked about these issues before. And I was actually quite surprised by that, because I'm in my Seattle bubble. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never heard anyone here say that this was the first time they've ever talked about any of these issues. But in many communities, there's not a lot of talk about these issues at all. And so sometimes this can be really opening up the minds of young people to, like, even just thinking about gender equity and about sexual assault and domestic violence. These are some quotes that we felt were very powerful from the participants nationally. So girls are and can be more than what stereotypes say. You have a bigger voice than you think. This is when they ask them what they learned for the program or what impact the program had on them. Athletes as leaders made us great leaders in the school and made the school a better social environment. Girls should be sticking up for other girls and not tearing them down, because we are all in this together. Someone else said, I learned it's up to us to change the stereotypes. And lastly, girls are powerful and can do anything. Okay, so I want to pause here, or actually kind of wrap up here, and see if we have questions. So someone said, is there a survey to see if our community is ready for it, or do we create it? Okay, great question. So 2 resources for you. One is going to be the implementation guide that will walk you through. Let me just go back and show you this slide. It walks you through each of these steps. So these 4 that I touched on just briefly, there's a lot more information in the implementation guide for advocates that will explain more on each of these and how you can assess. And then an actual checklist where you rate them through a very kind of rigorous series of questions that you ask multiple stakeholders in the community is this model called the Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Model. And we had a full training on this when we started our projects for all the grantees, but they also have a lot of the information online that's accessible to you. So you can check that out. And at first, honestly, I was kind of dreading it because it was a lot of work to meet with all of these stakeholders at the high school and to just even get on their calendars. And these were people who you want to be strategic about, people that could be, their support could mean the success of your program, and their non-support could mean your program not going anywhere. So people that can put up red tape and get in the way of the success of your program. So you want to think about who those high-level stakeholders are. In this case, you're not really talking about students themselves, even though ultimately like a youth-led thing should really be, led by youth. But these are kind of people that can actually stop the program before it even starts, if you know what I mean. So when you're in the high school, that's going to be principal, all the assistant principals. In this case, we have 3 assistant principals, the athletic director, the head school counselor, people like that. You want to meet with them, and they have a really scripted kind of interview where you can rate them. And then you look at the results. It's very data focused, and then it will give you an idea of this, is this program ready? Is this school or community ready to embark on this project? And also, I found out a lot of resources that they already had that I wasn't aware of. So it was actually a huge benefit in so many ways. And it just helped me build those relationships. So in the end, I was really glad that we did use that model. And again, you can find more on their website, Tri-Ethnic Community Readiness Model. Okay. Someone else asked, which should come first, this program or the Coaching Boys into Men program? That's a great question, and I think it's up to you and which relationships you have built. I think if you're just starting with one team, it doesn't really matter. But what you really want to avoid is all the boys teams doing Coaching Boys into Men, or multiple boys teams doing Coaching Boys into Men, and then offering nothing for the girls teams. And then vice versa, doing it with more than one girls team and not offering anything for the boys team. I think if it's just one team and you're trying to get the movement started or the project started, it's fine to just do either or, depending on who you have on board first. But as soon as that second team is on board, you're going to very quickly get the question, well, why aren't we doing this with the girls teams, or why aren't we doing this with the boys teams? And because we're marketing it as a leadership program, we're not marketing this as a sexual assault prevention program. No one's going to want to do that. So we market it as a leadership program. That is what it is. And so we have to legally make sure we're offering that to everyone. So it's okay to start small and start with one team, but you should always say our ultimate plan is that this is just the start, and we are going to continue offering this to every team of all genders. Hope that answers it. And I'm happy to talk more if you email me directly too on that topic. We just started at a new high school here, and it actually started because my local high school that I work with on the grant shares a gymnastics, what is it called? Like a gymnastics, the equipment. I can't even think of what the word is, but the gym. They share a gym because gymnastics equipment is very expensive, and a lot of high schools don't have a designated gym just for the gymnastics equipment, and it's a lot to set up and clean up, and so they have a designated area. And so our high school shares with another high school, and that's actually how we started at this other high school. So we've only done Athletes as Leaders with just the girls gymnastics team, and we're talking closely with the athletic director about, okay, so now we've done it with one girls team. We really want to find a boys team now who's willing to coach, start coaching boys into men, and then kind of build it from there. So it's okay to start small. It's okay to start with one team. Okay, checking in with Jennifer and Lorianne. Did you see any other questions that I missed?
I don't see any questions that you missed, but I do just want to make sure that people know that we can help with readiness assessments. We're very interested in, pre and post testing, and also this sort of retrospective post testing after the fact. We're happy to support you in those kinds of things. And Rebecca, thank you so much for making your evaluation tools available. And I think that's really wonderful. And we have lots of workarounds when we talk about doing Coaching Boys into Men, lots of different ways that evaluation can happen. Knowing that, there's an evaluation for the coaches and also evaluation for the athletes. And we've had some stumbling blocks with pre and post tests with athletes where the pre-test might be really giving us what we want, kind of anticipating what the right answers are, but then in the post-test kind of messing with us a little bit, which mess with the findings, right? And so we've had some different, so we're happy to talk through all of that with anybody who's really raring to go and ready to go. So you just wanted to give you that kind of heads up. We love the Tri-Ethnic Center's readiness assessment process. We do a training on that. We've been trained to do that. We've adapted that and helped other communities adapt that readiness tool for a variety of things, but particularly around readiness around prevention strategies like this. So absolutely, reach out to Rebecca, reach out to us on that. And then there was one more thing that I wanted to just ask about, which had to do with, this very last question about, what comes first, coaching boys into men or athletes as leaders or simultaneous. And I think, Rebecca, you said something that I just want to really underscore because I think it's just so wise, which is that, so often we want the perfect is the enemy of the good. And we have this vision of, how things are supposed to go, and your support to just sort of, go through the doors that have been opened. Don't keep knocking on doors that remain closed. Right. And, sometimes it's, doing things a little bit differently and adapting best case scenario for what people are asking for. I've seen this happen all over the country in a variety of ways where, coaching boys into men is the thing that happens first, but then they'll do something that's more holistic for the whole school. Or they, people might do them simultaneously. My goal for New York programs would be to have something like this where there'd be coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders either simultaneously or one first and then the other, because it is burdensome to try to launch something big, with the hope that you could go deeper eventually and have something more comprehensive throughout the school. You know, that might be engaging parents, that might be engaging people who, kids who aren't athletes, that might be engaging theater students, that might be engaging bus drivers, So, to be thinking, once you do have something like this launched, how else, engaging school nurses, my goodness, I can't believe I forgot that one. So there's different ways, while these are prevention strategies specifically for athletes, there might be ways that those athletes then could become peer leaders in other ways that are engaging the school in other ways.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, and I am very fortunate in that I have funding to devote my position to doing a very comprehensive prevention project at one local high school. So we are doing way beyond coaching boys and men and athletes as leaders, and I just didn't, even touch on that since this webinar is focused specifically on athletes, but we are doing comprehensive sexual health education in all the health classes. I actually am working with the drama students this year, and I'm so excited. They're doing a spring production of a play called Spring Awakening, which does have some very sensitive topics in it, including incest, child sexual abuse, and rape. And they want to do it very sensitively, and they want to have even some little internal policies that they want to create to support the cast and the crew, and then also be accountable with education and support for their audience and larger community. So I'm super excited to work with the drama students. And we've also put on large-scale events. Once you have this program up and running, you just don't know, you could get support. We had some local professional athletes come in and speak at an event that was geared at parents of athletes, and so that was really exciting. We have been, like I mentioned before, we've done larger trainings for the school faculty, the teaching staff, on everything from how to, create a gender equitable classroom, to how to be a trauma-informed teacher, to how to have good boundaries with your students, which is really important. And so we have been lucky to have the resources to be able to devote and really build on this program. So I would like to say that these are just one piece of the pie when we're really talking about like holistic, comprehensive prevention. But the reason why I often start with this is because it's just so, it's so packaged, and sometimes people want something that's kind of packaged and scripted and ready to go and easy to follow and not a huge commitment. And so these are sometimes, like you said, a great way in the door. And then we always hope the gold standard would be to, build something very comprehensive from there.
Right. I agree. I think people are really responsive. I've seen so much interest in this packaged, polished approach. And, and folks that are really grateful that there's something also for the girls. And I so appreciate that you said that it's not just the right thing to do, it's also a Title IX violation if you're offering, programming for, one group and not another.
Right.
And so, yeah. I am getting just a couple more. I recognize that we're right at the very end of things, and so please, any last minute questions, please put in the chat box. But, I do appreciate the question about, so we've got something for boys, we've got something for girls. What do we do about that that piece of, gender nonconforming? Are we going to pigeonhole people? How are we going to handle that? And that's really, that is a learning edge for everybody and so critical. But, it's worth it to think about that as you're approaching schools, because schools need guidance the same way we need guidance, and the same way we're thinking through how to make this programming as inclusive as possible. We can also offer some suggestions to schools who are struggling with the same.
Right. Yeah. And I talked about this when I came to New York at the Prevention Summit, that if you were there, you heard me speak that I do have mixed feelings about gender-specific programming. And I do think that when you're doing gender-specific programming, there are pros and there are cons. And one of them is that it's not fully kind of inclusive and welcoming to non-binary and transgender folks sometimes. And the only reason why I kind of felt comfortable with this approach is because we're working within a sports setting which is already segregated by gender. We're coming into a setting which is already dividing up, right, boys and girls. But I also think that we can be advocates for non-binary athletes. They have the right to play sports, and they should be playing on a team. And so we have to make sure that they're supported, and sometimes they need an advocate maybe just to even be able to play on a team. And so there's that piece too, that we also, even though these are gender-specific programs, we're very intentional in Athletes as Leaders to not reinforce the gender binary, and to not be super heteronormative, talking about that this applies to all types of relationships, same-sex and heterosexual and gay and lesbian, bisexual relationships. And so I think that's really, really important. The key concept really from this program is there's no right way to express your gender. There's no right way to be a boy or to be a girl, and that's really foundational in our field, and that kind of comes out throughout the discussion. So I appreciate you saying that, Lorianne, because it's really a complicated and nuanced discussion.
Yes, and we all have a lot more to learn and to do in order to make, to make some strides forward in that. I see that we're at time. I really appreciate all the really good questions. If there's anything left, feel free to, something that didn't get answered for you, reach out to Rebecca, reach out to us as a conduit. We are just so excited. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for all this wonderful information. And we definitely want to stay in touch here in New York with what you're doing, not just in Seattle, but all over the country, and, just make sure that we're really tapping into what you're learning about all of this. This was fantastic. So thank you. Okay, so you're saying email list. So sign up for the email list. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, that's how you want to say, why don't we let you close that out by saying more about your email list?
Oh, I was just going to say for more, yes. Thank you all so much for attending. And then if you want to get more information from us for the future, we don't email a lot, but a couple times a year, just go to athletesasleaders.org. At the very, very front, it will say sign up for our email list, and we'll keep you informed of any updates.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Stay in touch about your efforts so that we can learn from all that you're doing in your communities and your programs. And thank you, Rebecca, so much for joining us and sharing your expertise on this.
You are very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.